The US says that North Korea is pledging to destroy key nuclear facilities, with another meeting between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un in the offing. Elsewhere, Ivory Coast's former President Laurent Gbagbo is set to tell the ICC it's time he was set free. We report on the legacy of the post-election crisis that saw him end up in The Hague. And 12 people have now been killed in the deep freeze in the US. Forecasters say conditions should ease over the weekend. Thanks for joining us. North Korea has pledged to destroy all its nuclear enrichment facilities. That, according to US Special Envoy Stephen Biegun, who said Washington's ready to explore ways for Pyongyang to give up on atomic weapons. Biegun said the US now needs a complete list of nuclear assets before any deal can be struck. As he prepares the ground for a possible second summit between Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, following their historic meeting last June.
We have communicated to our North Korean counterparts that we are prepared to pursue, simultaneously and in parallel, all of the commitments our two leaders made in their joint statement at Singapore last summer, along with planning for a bright future for the Korean people and the new opportunities that will open when sanctions are lifted and the Korean peninsula is at peace, provided that North Korea likewise fulfills its commitment to final, fully verified.
Moving on now, European powers have earned themselves a rebuke from Washington after launching a trade mechanism to bypass US sanctions on Iran. France, Britain and Germany hope the system will help save the nuclear deal with Tehran by allowing it to keep doing business with EU companies. US reimposed sanctions when Donald Trump walked out of the accord last year. Lauren Burster has details.
Circumventing US sanctions, the financial mechanism introduced by Britain, Germany and France will allow companies to trade with Iran without direct financial transactions and therefore without using the US dollar. The bartering system was hailed by the EU's diplomacy chief as an important incentive for Tehran to abide by its nuclear commitments.
The European Union is fully behind the full implementation of the nuclear deal with Iran for the simple reasons that we see it is working. There are 13 reports now by the IAEA that Iran is fully compliant with its nuclear commitment, and we believe this is a key element of our security in the region.
Washington warned that any company trading with Iran would risk severe consequences, including losing access to the US market. And while it didn't directly condemn the mechanism, the State Department said it didn't expect it to have any impact, as it believes most corporations won't risk compromising their business interests in the US. Belgium's foreign minister admitted it was up to individual companies to decide whether they would use the new payment vehicle.
Ultimately, it's up to the companies if they want to choose to join this vehicle or if they'd rather not trade with Iran. But this is a strong message that we can send our Iranian colleagues to continue on this path.
Donald Trump's decision last year to pull out of a nuclear agreement with Iran was widely criticized by other signatories, including China, Russia, and several EU countries, who said Tehran had not broken its side of the deal. Since then, the UN Atomic Agency has certified Iran's compliance with its commitment 13 times, and even the CIA said earlier this week that Tehran was abiding by the accord.
Elsewhere, Lebanon finally has a new government after 8 months of wrangling. Prime Minister Saad Hariri unveiling his cabinet, which sees both the foreign and finance ministers keeping their jobs. The country's complex political system shares power across religious and community divides, and delays in forming governments are common. So the announcement will stave off economic and structural problems by unlocking billions of dollars in aid. Now, tensions continue to mount in Venezuela, where self-proclaimed interim President Juan Guaido has accused special forces of threatening his family. That as he outlines the opposition's plan to tackle the country's economic and political crisis. That includes defying a government ban on humanitarian aid by bringing convoys of medicine into the country. Guaido said that would be a major test of where the military's loyalties lie. Catherine Viet has more.
Laying out a plan for Venezuela's future, Juan Guaido highlighted 3 key points: an end to the political standoff, a transitional government, and free elections. As part of his efforts, Guaido has reached out to the military.
We've spoken of the amnesty guarantees that have been given, but the armed forces also have a role in the reconstruction of the country. Citizen security to stabilize the borders, all of us have a role at this moment.
The opposition knows that getting the military to withdraw its support from embattled President Nicolas Maduro would be a crucial step towards changing the government. Guaido also outlined measures to reestablish public services and tackle the country's growing humanitarian crisis.
Nobody can live on $3 a month. Everyone needs to understand this, including the international community. It's not a question of left or right, it's a humanitarian issue.
Meanwhile, international pressure is mounting on Maduro, with the European Parliament voting to support Guaido until fresh elections can be held.
It's a pleasure to announce that the European Parliament recognizes Mr. Guaido as the legitimate interim president of Venezuela.
Individual key European countries are also prepared to recognize Guaido if Maduro refuses to call for new elections by Sunday. The European Union's foreign policy chief says the EU has agreed to create a contact group with Latin American countries to help resolve the crisis.
Meanwhile, 5 overseas journalists and their local colleagues detained in Venezuela have been released. Among them Baptiste de Monstier and Pierre Caille, who worked for popular French TV show Quotidien. And they're now on their way back to Paris. Ivory Coast former president is appealing against his continued detention at the International Criminal Court this Friday. Laurent Gbagbo remains behind bars despite the fact judges in The Hague acquitted him of all charges in January. Prosecutors successfully applied, however, to have Gbagbo kept in jail while they challenge that verdict. And Gainsford takes us through the background to his trial.
When Laurent Gbagbo's trial began on January 28, 2016, it was the first time the International Criminal Court had tried a former head of state. 5 years earlier, Gbagbo was still the Ivorian president, running for re-election. The campaign had been tense. So was election day on 28 November 2010. The tension escalated further when the Electoral Commission declared opposition leader Alassane Ouattara as a winner.
Alassane Ouattara got 54.10% of the ballots.
These results were later invalidated by the Constitutional Council, which said Laurent Gbagbo had won the vote. Confusion soon turned violent. And for 5 months, the Ivory Coast descended into chaos. 3,000 people were killed in clashes between the two rival camps. That's when critics say Laurent Gbagbo launched a campaign of organized murder, rape and persecution against his opponents, spearheaded by his right-hand man, Charles Blé Goudé. Gbagbo was arrested by Ouattara's troops in April 2011 and turned over to the ICC to face trial for crimes against humanity.
Madame la Présidente, Madame et Monsieur les juges.
After over 2 years on trial, judges in The Hague cleared Gbagbo and his right-hand man, Charles Blé Goudé, of all charges in January. Despite more than 80 witnesses called to court, ICC judges said the case against Gbagbo was exceptionally weak. But for now, the former Ivory Coast strongman remains behind bars as prosecutors appeal the verdict.
Now, France is gearing up for another weekend of protests with the Gilets jaunes, or yellow vests, once again set to take to the streets. What began as an outpouring of anger over a planned fuel tax hike swiftly morphed into a broader revolt against President Macron and his economic reforms. But the debate about the now weekly demonstrations in cities across France has increasingly focused on police tactics, and particularly the weapons they've been using. For more on this, I'm joined by our International Affairs editor, Philip Turl. Hi, Philip. Tell us more about these weapons. They've been blamed for some pretty gruesome injuries.
Well, they have. And one of the big complaints about these weapons is that they have, in fact, hit people and made them go blind in one eye. And that is why there's been growing calls over the last week by the CGT trade union and also by a human rights organisation for these weapons to be simply banned. So what is an LBD? An LBD is a flashball rubber bullet firer. LBD is a defence ball launcher, if you like. That's the equivalent in English for the French name. And the police say they need them because when they are faced with such violence as they've seen during the Yellow Vest protest movement since the 17th of November, particularly here in Paris, where there have been these terrible scenes almost of revolution taking place in the Champs-Élysées. They say they've been hit by paving stones, by pebbles, by people chucking acid at them, and they need these splashball weapons to fight back crowds of an angry mob, basically, who have nothing to do with the bona fide Yellow Vest protesters. The Human Rights League doesn't hear it quite that way. They say France has the most lethal weapons which can be used by the police of any European country, and they don't need to be firing rubber bullets at protesters. They need to be able to bring them under control some other way.
OK, and in terms of the protests themselves, Macron has, to an extent at least, basically given in. He's offered quite a lot of concessions.
He has indeed.
Who's still out on the streets and why?
Well, he's given in. I mean, 10 billion euros worth of concessions already handed over to them. He's given them the freeze on the petrol price hike that was due to come in on the 1st of January. He's also frozen gas and electricity prices, and he's offered a €100 bonus to the minimum wage. But for many of the protesters, that's not enough. So the president's gone further than that now. He's organised this 2-month national debate where people can come forward to meetings or go on the internet and write down what they think the government should be doing. Most of that turns around bringing spending power up, bringing up a speed limit the government recently brought down to 80 kilometres an hour, bringing it back to 90 kilometres an hour.
And saying how long Macron can talk for, which is quite a long time.
Which is also the other one. Macron's made 1 or 2 surprise appearances around the country talking to people, but I think most French people believe that it's a good idea, but in the long run there's not much going to come out of this national debate. But that's one of the ways the president has tried to boost his opinion poll ratings, which went right down at the start of the Yellow Vest protest movement, but now have gone back up to just over 30%, 31%.
Philip Tell, thank you very much. Going to head to the US now, where forecasters say the polar vortex that's brought a deep freeze to the Midwest is set to ease finally over the weekend. 12 people have now died as a result of the extreme cold, with 1/3 of the country's population experiencing temperatures of 17 degrees Celsius and below. Catherine Vier has more.
It's been another day of record-setting cold in the Midwest, as temperatures remain in negative double digits. The deep freeze has burst water mains and knocked out electricity across the region. Officials have been asking residents to lower their thermostats to help power companies meet increasing heating demands. In Minnesota, one utility company was handing out space heaters during an outage.
His phone went off at 3:30 in the morning, and it was a recording from the gas company just basically saying that we have no heat, no hot water.
The extreme cold has also disrupted travel. More than 4,000 flights at Chicago's 2 international airports have been canceled.
My flight was canceled Tuesday night and then again on Wednesday. And so it's Thursday, and I'm arriving back home just this morning.
Meteorologists say the deadly cold snap is expected to ease by Friday, but the brutal chill is moving eastward. In New York City, public fountains froze as New Yorkers sought places to stay warm.
Oh, it's crazy. Right now, I was just finding out where any place to hide because it's too cold.
I've been here for all my life, nothing as cold as this. It's freezing, everything's freezing. We went to the fountain down the street. The water that's falling is freezing. Everything's freezing.
Officials warn with such low temperatures, frostbite can occur in as little as 5 minutes.
And finally, 3 former US servicemen have officially become French citizens after thwarting a jihadist attack on a train from Amsterdam to Paris in 2015. The trio honoured at a ceremony in the US state of California. They were on board the Thalys train to the French capital as part of a European holiday when they intervened to subdue a man who'd opened fire on passengers. Let's take a listen to these French heroes.
It was important for us to become citizens because We have such a connection with France now. We've been back 4 or 5 times since the terrorist attack. And of course, the terrorist attack having such a huge impact on our lives, it just meant a lot for us to be able to travel freely between 2 countries and even own property and live there if we like.
I feel really happy. It's just something growing up that we never thought would be possible. And it's just a humbling experience, and that we all get to do it together. It's just a really good thing.
It opens up, you know, a lot of different options in my life with what I possibly want to do. So I'm hoping it'll be beneficial in those ways as well. And I'm hoping my children and my future wife will appreciate it. So maybe I have a French wife. You never know.
That's it for this bulletin. Do stay with us here on France 24.